This incident is from St. Jude's Memorial Hospital, a massive, towering medical facility located on the freezing, isolated outskirts of Boston, Massachusetts. There is an ancient, blood-soaked proverb written in the darkest, forbidden pages of demonology. When a corpse refuses to rot, it is because the demon within is starving for the boiling blood of the living. If the seal of the dead is ever broken, the corpse will rise from the cold steel, peel the flesh from the innocent, and drink the crimson fluid from their torn veins until its unholy thirst drowns the world in a horrific, unrelenting slaughter. My name is Dr. Arthur. The events that transpired on the night of my wife's birthday completely destroyed my belief in science, logic, and the laws of life and death. The nightmares still haunt me, replaying the exact moment they brought her into my hospital. Thank you. Thank you so much, Clara, I smiled, putting my phone down on the kitchen counter. Today is officially a thank you day. My phone hasn't stopped ringing since morning with birthday wishes for you. Clara smiled warmly, wrapping her arms around my neck. So, Dr. Arthur, what is the grand plan for tonight? The plan is whatever you want it to be, I replied, pulling her close. Shall we go to that Italian restaurant downtown for a candlelight dinner? So, the doctor is finally in a romantic mood. Clara laughed, her eyes lighting up. Okay, let's go. Give me 20 minutes to get ready. I watched her walk toward the bedroom, feeling a deep sense of relief that I actually had a night off to celebrate with her. But in the medical profession, peace is always an illusion. Before Clara could even reach the stairs, my cell phone rang. It was the hospital's emergency line. Hello, Dr. Arthur, the chief medical officer's voice barked through the receiver. An urgent case has just come in. A homicide. We need you to perform a full autopsy and submit the forensic report immediately. The police are demanding it. But sir, tonight the orders came directly from the top, Arthur. Get to the hospital now. The line clicked dead. I let out a heavy, frustrated sigh, rubbing my temples. What happened? Clara asked, stepping back into the kitchen, her smile instantly fading. An emergency case just came in, I said, unable to look her in the eye. A homicide. I have to go to the hospital urgently to perform the autopsy. Are you serious, Arthur? Right now. Clara's voice cracked with disappointment. We just decided we were going out for a candlelight dinner. It's my birthday. I know, Clara, I know. But try to understand, I am a doctor. It's my duty. I have to fulfill it. I will go, finish the autopsy, and be back before you know it. Just give me a little time. As I turned to grab my coat, a sudden, sharp crash echoed through the kitchen. I spun around. Clara had accidentally knocked a crystal water glass off the counter. It shattered into hundreds of jagged, glittering pieces across the hardwood floor. I told you not to go, Clara whispered, staring down at the broken glass, her face pale. Breaking glass, it's a bad omen, Arthur. It's inauspicious. Please, just stay home tonight. Clara, please, I don't believe in all this superstition, I said, grabbing my car keys. It's just a broken glass. I'll be back soon. I left the house, completely ignoring her warning, completely unaware that I was driving straight into a living hell. When I arrived at St. Jude's Memorial Hospital, the emergency bay was absolute chaos. A police cruiser was parked haphazardly near the ambulance entrance, its red and blue lights flashing violently against the concrete walls. 2 armed officers were dragging an older man through the sliding doors. The man was covered in blood, his clothes torn, and he was screaming at the top of his lungs like a maniac. "Let me kill her! Let me kill her!" the old man shrieked, fighting violently against the handcuffs. "She is going to kill us all. Let me finish her. Hold him down." Inspector Hayes shouted, his heavy winter coat soaked in melting snow. I rushed over to the chaotic scene. "Harry," I called out to the ward boy standing near a stretcher. "Did you call me? Is this the case?" "Yes, Dr. Arthur," Harry nodded nervously. "This is the one." "Put the body down, let me check," I ordered. I walked over to the black body bag resting on the stretcher. Inspector Hayes stepped up beside me, wiping sweat and snow from his forehead. "Inspector, she is already dead," I said, shining my penlight over the thick plastic. "But what exactly happened to her? Look at these wounds." "Doctor, her own father murdered her," Inspector Hayes said, pointing a disgusted finger at the old man screaming in the corner. "George, right there." Even after I warned him to stop, he kept stabbing her. He wouldn't stop. "I need you to perform the post-mortem as fast as possible. I have to present this report in court tomorrow morning so I can put that lunatic behind bars." "Inspector, to be honest, looking at the lividity and the temperature of the skin, it looks like she's been dead for quite a long time," I noted, my medical instincts kicking in. "Her body is completely freezing." "No, doctor, the murder happened just an hour ago," Hayes insisted. "Just get the report done." Before I could respond, Harry, the ward boy, suddenly jumped back from the stretcher, his eyes wide with fear. "Blood!" Harry shouted, pointing at the floor. "Where is this blood coming from? I swear I just mopped this floor." "Are you drunk, Harry?" Inspector Hayes snapped. "Get a hold of yourself. Move the body to the morgue." As Harry began wheeling the stretcher away, George stopped fighting the officers and locked his wild, bloodshot eyes directly on me. "She is not dead!" George screamed, his voice tearing through the emergency room. "You don't know what she is. If you take the seal out, she will slaughter every single one of you. Listen to me." I ignored the raving men and followed the stretcher down the long, cold corridors to the subterranean autopsy suite. Meanwhile, back at home, my phone was ringing incessantly. Clara was pacing the living room, dialing my number over and over again. When I didn't pick up, her frustration boiled over. "Fine. Everything is more important to you than me. Even on my birthday," she muttered to herself, grabbing her coat and her purse. "If you won't come home, I'll bring your birthday surprise to you." Down in the morgue, the heavy steel doors locked behind me. The room was freezing, sterile, and eerily quiet, save for the low hum of the fluorescent lights. Nurse Mary was already prepping the surgical trays, laying out the bone saws and scalpels. "Let's get this over with, Mary," I sighed, pulling on my latex gloves and surgical mask. "I need to get back to my wife." "Yes, Doctor," Mary said, turning on the massive, circular surgical lights above the stainless steel table. We unzipped the heavy black body bag and pulled the corpse out onto the table. Her name was Sarah. She was stunningly beautiful, but her skin was an impossible, porcelain white. "Let's start the physical documentation," I said, grabbing my clipboard. "Body belongs to Sarah. Age appears to be approximately 24 years old. Eyes are deep blue. Face is round, and the lips are slightly red." I stopped writing and frowned. I leaned closer to the corpse's face. "Nurse Mary, look at this." I pointed to the corner of Sarah's mouth. A thick, dark crimson fluid was slowly leaking from her lips, trailing down her pale cheek. "Blood." "Cotton, Doctor," Mary said quickly, handing me a sterile swab. She looked just as confused as I did. "Doctor, you're acting like the corpse just woke up. There are some rare cases where fluid purges from the nose and mouth due to gas buildup in the lungs," I explained, though my mind, trained through years of working as a medical laboratory technician, was screaming that this fluid was far too fresh, far too arterial to be a standard postmortem purge. I took the cotton swab and wiped the blood from her lips. As I did, her jaw slacked open slightly. I shined my pen light into her oral cavity and froze. "What is that?" Nurse Mary whispered, leaning over my shoulder. Lodged deep inside Sarah's mouth, tucked behind her teeth, was a crumpled, dark piece of material. "Give me the forceps," I demanded. I carefully inserted the steel clamps into her mouth, gripped the edge of the material, and pulled it out. It was a thick, heavy piece of parchment, completely soaked in saliva and blood. "Doctor, there is something written on it," Mary said, her voice trembling. I unfolded the heavy paper under the surgical light. It was covered in bizarre, jagged text. "These are ancient Latin symbols." "Pagan runes," I muttered, my brow furrowing in deep confusion. Why would someone shove this into her mouth? Her mouth was open, right? "I was just outside getting supplies. I didn't see anything," Mary stammered, stepping back from the table. Suddenly, the massive fluorescent lights overhead violently flickered. The electrical hum turned into an angry, buzzing screech as the lights dimmed, plunging the morgue into a heavy, suffocating shadow, before flashing back to blinding white. "What is happening to the power?" I asked, looking up at the ceiling. "I don't know, doctor," Mary panicked. "Go outside and check the main breaker in the hallway," I ordered. Mary nodded quickly and practically ran out of the autopsy suite, the heavy doors swinging shut behind her. I was left completely alone in the flickering room. I turned my attention back to the Latin parchment in my hand, trying to make sense of the bizarre ritualistic evidence. Thump. A soft, heavy sound echoed behind me. I slowly turned around to face the surgical table. The harsh white light was still glaring down. The surgical tools were still perfectly aligned on the metal tray. But the 130-pound corpse of Sarah was gone. The stainless steel table was completely, terrifyingly empty. The human mind has a desperate, built-in fail-safe when confronted with the impossible. It searches for a rational explanation, no matter how absurd. As I stared at the empty stainless steel table, my medical training scrambled for a logical answer. Catalepsy. A severe misdiagnosis of death. Someone moved the body while my back was turned. But none of those explanations accounted for the trail of thick, dark blood dripping from the edge of the metal table onto the cold linoleum floor. "Mary." I called out, my voice trembling, echoing off the tiled walls of the morgue. Silence. The fluorescent lights continued their sickly, dying flicker. I grabbed a heavy steel bone saw from the surgical tray, my knuckles turning white as I gripped the handle. I slowly followed the trail of blood droplets leading toward the heavy double doors of the autopsy suite. My heart was slamming against my ribs like a trapped bird. Suddenly, the heavy doors swung open. I violently raised the bone saw, ready to strike, but froze just in time. Standing in the doorway, holding a small chocolate cake with a single lit candle, was my wife. "Happy birthday to you," Clara sang softly, stepping into the freezing morgue with a warm, beautiful smile on her face. "Happy birthday, dear Arthur." "Clara." I dropped the bone saw onto the metal tray with a loud clatter. "What in God's name are you doing here? Are you out of your mind?" Clara's smile faltered, her eyes darting around the sterile, blood-stained room. "Well, since my husband decided to spend my 30th birthday in a morgue, I decided to bring the celebration to him." "But you look like you've just seen a ghost, Arthur." "You cannot be here," I said, rushing over to her and grabbing her by the shoulders. I frantically looked down the dark hallway behind her. "It is not safe. You need to leave this hospital right now." "Arthur, stop it, you're hurting me," Clara said, pulling back, her expression shifting from playful to annoyed. "I just drove through a blinding snowstorm to bring you dinner, and you are throwing me out. There's no one else even down here." The front desk was completely empty. "Clara, listen to me," I pleaded, my voice dropping to a frantic whisper. "The corpse. The homicide victim they brought in, she's gone. She was dead on the table, and now she is gone." Clara stared at me for a long moment, completely bewildered, before letting out a nervous laugh. "What are you talking about? Are you trying to scare me so I'll go home?" Arthur, that isn't funny. I am not joking. I yelled, the panic finally breaking through my professional facade. Before I could explain further, the heavy emergency phone on the wall began to ring. The shrill, piercing sound made both of us jump. I rushed over and snatched the receiver off the hook. Arthur, it's Captain Miller down at the Central Precinct, the voice crackled through the terrible static. Is Inspector Hayes still at the hospital with you? No, Hayes stepped out to get coffee, I said hurriedly. Captain, something is horribly wrong here. The body, Arthur, listen to me very carefully, Miller interrupted, his voice laced with a deep, unprecedented terror. I am standing in the interrogation room with George, the victim's father. The blood on the murder weapon, it's completely gone. It evaporated. What? I breathed, my scientific mind completely rejecting the statement. In the background of the call, I could hear George screaming at the top of his lungs. I told you. She is a succubus. She is a demon. If they took the Latin seal out of her mouth, she is awake. You have to listen to me. She will hunt them. She needs human blood to sustain her physical form, and if she mates with a living man, she will become immortal. Stop them before she kills everyone in that building. Arthur, Captain Miller said, his voice deadly serious. George is claiming the girl isn't human. He said he put a cursed parchment in her mouth to paralyze the demon inside her. Tell me you haven't started the autopsy. Tell me you didn't take it out. I looked down at my bloody latex gloves, and then over at the crumpled, blood-soaked parchment lying on the floor near the surgical table. Arthur. Miller yelled over the phone. I took it out, I whispered. The line went dead. A dial tone echoed in my ear. Arthur, what is going on? Clara asked, setting the cake down on a medical tray, her annoyance fully replaced by genuine fear. Who was that? We have to get out of here, I said, grabbing her hand. Right now. I pulled Clara out of the autopsy suite and into the dimly lit, subterranean corridor. The power was still fluctuating wildly, casting long, terrifying shadows across the peeling wallpaper. We needed to find the freight elevator and get to the ground floor. As we hurried past the storage lockers, a horrific, blood-curdling scream echoed from the floor above us. It was a man's scream, thick with agonizing pain and absolute terror. Oh my God, Clara gasped, squeezing my hand tight. We ran toward the stairwell, pushing through the heavy fire doors and ascending to the ground floor. The main lobby of St. Jude's was plunged into near darkness, illuminated only by the faint, red glow of the emergency exit signs. Lying in the center of the waiting room, sprawled across the linoleum tiles, was Inspector Hayes. I rushed forward, my medical instincts overriding my fear. Hayes. Inspector. I dropped to my knees beside him, but the moment I touched his neck, I recoiled in horror. Hayes was dead. But he hadn't just been killed, he had been completely butchered. His throat was ripped open, the flesh violently torn as if by the jaws of a massive wild animal. But the most terrifying detail was the lack of blood on the floor. A wound that severe to the jugular should have painted the entire waiting room red. Instead, his body was completely pale, drained dry, like a discarded husk. "Arthur." Clara whimpered, backing away from the body, covering her mouth to suppress a scream. Suddenly, a locker door in the reception office burst open. Harry, the ward boy, fell out onto the floor, trembling violently, his face completely devoid of color. He scrambled backward against the wall, clutching a mop handle like a weapon. "Harry!" I shouted, running over to him. "What happened? Who did this to Hayes?" "The girl." Harry hyperventilated, tears streaming down his face, his eyes wide with madness. "The dead girl. I saw it, Dr. Arthur. I saw it with my own eyes." "Calm down, Harry. Tell me what you saw." I shook him, trying to snap him out of his shock. "I was coming back from the cafeteria," Harry stammered, pointing a shaking finger toward the dark corridors of the ICU. Inspector Hayes was walking ahead of me. And then, she was just standing there in the dark. The dead girl from the body bag. Her skin was so white, and her eyes were completely black. Hayes pulled his gun, but he couldn't even fire. She moved so fast. She jumped on him like a wild animal. She bit into his neck, and she drank, Doctor. She drank his blood. Clara let out a choked sob, grabbing the lapels of my coat. "Arthur, please. We have to leave. We have to get out of here." Okay, come on," I said, hauling Harry to his feet. "To the main entrance. Let's go." We sprinted across the dark lobby toward the massive, automatic glass sliding doors that led out into the freezing Boston snowstorm. But as we got closer, I saw that the heavy metal security shutters had been pulled down, completely sealing the entrance. I grabbed the manual override chain and pulled with all my strength. The rusted metal groaned, but it refused to budge. "It's jammed," I yelled, pulling my cell phone from my pocket. I looked at the screen. No service. "My phone is dead too," Clara cried, holding up her screen. "There's no network. The storm must have knocked out the cell towers," I realized, the full weight of our isolation crashing down on me. We were locked inside a massive, pitch-black hospital with no power, no communication, and a demonic entity hunting us for our blood. The ODP office. Harry shouted over the howling wind outside. "There is a secure landline in the outpatient department. It runs on an underground copper wire. It shouldn't be affected by the storm. Let's go, stay close to me," I ordered, picking up a heavy metal 4-pole to use as a weapon. We moved down the darkened, twisting corridors of the hospital like hunted prey. Every shadow looked like a crouching figure. Every creak of the building sounded like footsteps. The smell of copper and formaldehyde seemed to follow us, seeping from the air vents. We reached the ODP office. I kicked the door open and rushed to the front desk. The heavy, old-fashioned landline phone was sitting near the computer terminal. I snatched the receiver. There was a dial tone. "Thank God," I breathed, quickly dialing the number for the Central Police Precinct. It rang twice before Captain Miller picked up. "Arthur, are you still there?" Miller's voice yelled through the receiver. "Miller, we are trapped. The power is out, the doors are jammed, and Inspector Hayes is dead." I practically screamed into the phone. "The girl. Sarah, she killed him. Harry saw her. Listen to me, Arthur." George's frantic voice suddenly overpowered Miller's on the line. The father had grabbed the phone. "She is hunting you. Now that she has tasted blood, her physical form is regenerating. You cannot fight her with bullets or blunt weapons. She is a creature of dark magic. Then how do we stop her?" I yelled, pulling Clara behind me as the lights in the hallway outside the office began to violently flicker again. "The Latin seal." George screamed through the static. "The parchment you took out of her mouth. It is blessed with ancient pagan wards. You have to put it back into her mouth to paralyze the demon, and then you must pierce her heart with the ceremonial dagger. It is the only way to sever the entity from the corpse." "I don't have a ceremonial dagger, George. We are in a hospital." "Inspector Hayes," George shouted. Hayes took the dagger from the crime scene. It was tagged as evidence. He must have it on him. "Find the dagger, Arthur. If you don't send her back to hell tonight, she will." The line emitted a sharp, agonizing screech of electrical feedback, and then went completely, irreversibly dead. I slowly put the receiver down, my hands trembling. "Arthur," Clara whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "What did he say?" Before I could answer, a soft, melodic laugh echoed from the pitch-black hallway outside the office. "Oh, Arthur." The impossibly beautiful, chilling voice of Sarah whispered from the darkness, the sound vibrating through the walls. "Why are you running from me? Your blood smells so incredibly sweet." The sound of Sarah's voice echoing through the pitch-black corridor of the outpatient department was not loud, but it possessed a terrifying, supernatural resonance. It didn't just enter my ears, it vibrated against my teeth and settled deep into my chest. It was a voice that promised absolute ecstasy and unspeakable agony all at once. "She's right outside," Clara whimpered, her fingernails digging painfully into my forearm. "Arthur, she's right outside the door." Before I could think of a plan, the sheer, crushing psychological terror broke Harry completely. The young ward boy, already pushed far beyond the limits of his sanity by the sight of Inspector Hayes' butchered corpse, completely snapped. "No!" Harry shrieked, dropping the heavy metal mop handle. "I'm not dying in this place. I'm not letting her eat me. Harry, wait. Don't move. I hissed, reaching out to grab his scrubs. But I was too late. Blinded by raw panic, Harry bolted out of the ODP office and sprinted down the dark hallway, his footsteps slapping loudly against the linoleum. "Harry, come back!" I yelled. For 3 agonizing seconds, there was only the sound of his frantic running. And then, the running abruptly stopped. There was no scream. There was no struggle. There was only a sickening, wet crunch that sounded like a heavy tree branch snapping in half, followed by a heavy, wet thud against the wall. A horrific, wet tearing sound echoed through the silence. The sound of a predator feeding. Clara clamped her hands over her mouth, violently sobbing into her palms, her entire body shaking. I pulled her down beneath the heavy wooden reception desk, wrapping my arms tightly around her, my own heart hammering so hard I thought my ribs would crack. We crouched there in the suffocating darkness for what felt like an eternity, listening to the wet, horrific sounds emanating from the hallway. My scientific mind, the brain of a forensic pathologist, was visualizing exactly what was happening to Harry's anatomy, and it took every ounce of my willpower not to vomit. Finally, the feeding stopped. The soft, wet sound of bare feet slowly retreated down the corridor, moving away from our position, heading toward the upper floors of the hospital. I waited another full minute before I dared to breathe. "Clara," I whispered, pulling her close so she could barely hear me. "Listen to me very carefully. George said the only way to stop her is to put the Latin seal back into her mouth, and then pierce her heart with the ceremonial dagger." "Where is the dagger, Arthur?" she choked out, her face pale in the dim emergency light. Inspector Hayes tagged it as evidence at the crime scene. He must have it on him. We have to go back to the lobby, search his body, get the dagger, and then go down to the subterranean morgue to get the parchment. If we don't do this, we are not going to survive the night. Clara looked at me, her eyes wide with terror, but she nodded slowly, her survival instinct finally overriding her panic. I picked up the heavy metal 4-pole, gripping it like a spear. "Stay exactly behind me. Step where I step. Do not make a sound." We crept out of the ODP office. The hallway was a nightmare. A massive pool of dark, arterial blood was smeared across the floor and the wall, but Harry's body was completely gone. She had dragged him away. We navigated the labyrinth of St. Jude's by the faint, eerie red glow of the emergency exit signs, moving agonizingly slow. Every shadow looked like her. Every gust of wind rattling the frozen windows sounded like her breathing. When we finally reached the main lobby, the silence was absolute. Inspector Hayes' body was exactly where we had left it, sprawled across the center of the waiting room, a pale, bloodless husk. "Keep an eye on the corridors," I whispered to Clara, dropping to my knees beside the dead police officer. I felt a profound wave of nausea as I reached into Hayes' blood-soaked winter coat. I patted down his chest pockets. Nothing. I moved to his heavy utility belt, my hands shaking violently. Finally, my fingers brushed against thick, crinkling plastic stuffed into his inside jacket pocket. I pulled it out. It was a heavy-duty police evidence bag. Inside, resting in the plastic, was a terrifying, ancient-looking weapon. It was a curved dagger, the handle carved from dark, blackened bone, the blade etched with the same jagged Latin runes that had been on the parchment. "I got it," I whispered, ripping the plastic bag open and pulling the heavy dagger free. The metal was unnaturally cold to the touch. "Arthur." Clara's voice was barely a breath. It was trembling so violently I almost didn't hear it. "I have it. Let's head to the stairwell," I said, standing up. "Arthur. Look." I turned around. Standing on the ceiling of the main lobby, directly above us, was Sarah. She wasn't holding on to the concrete. She was simply standing upside down, defying the absolute laws of gravity, her bare feet planted against the plaster. Her white hospital gown hung downward toward us, exposing her pale, flawless skin. Her raven black hair cascaded toward the floor. Her eyes were completely, terrifyingly black. No whites, no irises, just endless voids of darkness. "You brought me a present, Doctor," Sarah purred, her unhinged jaw opening, revealing rows of unnaturally sharp, blood-stained teeth. Before I could even raise the dagger, she dropped from the ceiling. She didn't fall, she pounced. She landed directly on top of Clara with the kinetic force of a speeding truck. Clara screamed as the demonic entity violently threw her across the lobby. Clara's body slammed hard into the reception desk, and she crumpled to the floor, motionless. "Clara!" I roared, lunging forward with the dagger. Sarah moved with blinding, impossible speed. She backhanded me across the chest. The sheer kinetic power behind the blow lifted me entirely off my feet and sent me crashing into the glass waiting room doors. The heavy dagger flew out of my hand, skittering across the linoleum floor into the darkness. I collapsed, gasping for air, feeling at least 2 of my ribs crack. Sarah slowly walked toward me, her hips swaying with an unnatural, predatory grace. The horrific, violent monster was gone, instantly replaced by a stunningly beautiful, seductive woman. It was a psychological weapon, designed to paralyze her prey. "Don't fight me, Arthur," she whispered, crouching down beside me, her cold, pale fingers gently tracing the line of my jaw. The smell of fresh blood and dark, intoxicating perfume washed over me. The old man was a fool. He didn't understand the gift I was given. "I am so hungry, Arthur. But I need more than just your blood. I need a mate. I need your life force. Give it to me, and we will walk through this world forever as gods." She leaned in close, her cold, blood-stained lips hovering inches from mine. I could feel the hypnotic, paralyzing energy radiating from her black eyes, commanding my brain to surrender. "Go to hell," I spat, pulling my fist back and punching her squarely in the jaw. Her head snapped to the side, but she didn't even flinch. Slowly, she turned her face back to me. The illusion of beauty shattered completely. Her jaw unhinged, dropping abnormally low, and a terrifying, demonic screech erupted from her throat. She grabbed me by the collar of my scrubs and hurled me across the floor like a rag doll. I slid violently across the linoleum, stopping right at the edge of the stairwell leading down to sublevel 3. "You will give me what I want," she roared, her voice shifting into a deep, overlapping, guttural growl. I scrambled down the concrete stairs, my ribs screaming in agony. I didn't have the dagger, but I knew where the parchment was. I burst through the heavy fire doors of the subterranean morgue. The harsh, fluorescent lights were still flickering violently. I stumbled toward the center of the room. There, lying on the floor next to the stainless steel autopsy table, was the crumpled, blood-soaked Latin seal. I dove for it, my fingers brushing the heavy parchment. A heavy, freezing foot slammed down onto my wrist, pinning my hand to the floor. I screamed in pain, the bones in my wrist grinding together. Sarah towered over me, her black eyes burning with unholy rage. "I will drain your wife first, and I will make you watch," she hissed, reaching down with a pale hand to rip my throat open. Suddenly, a loud, primal scream echoed through the morgue. Clara burst through the double doors. Her face was bruised and bleeding, but her eyes were filled with absolute, uncompromising fury. In her hands, she held the heavy bone saw she had grabbed from the surgical tray earlier. With all of her remaining strength, Clara swung the heavy steel saw directly into the side of Sarah's head. The heavy metal struck the demon's skull with a sickening crack. Sarah shrieked, stumbling backward, her foot lifting off my wrist. "Arthur, now!" Clara screamed, throwing something across the floor. It was the ceremonial dagger. She had found it in the lobby before coming down. I didn't hesitate. I snatched the blood-soaked Latin parchment from the floor in my left hand, and grabbed the bone-handled dagger in my right. Sarah recovered instantly, her head snapping toward Clara. She lunged, her jaws opening wide to tear Clara to shreds. I threw myself directly into her path. As Sarah's jaws snapped toward my face, I violently shoved my left hand deep into her unhinged mouth, forcing the blood-soaked Latin seal straight down her throat. The reaction was instantaneous. Sarah's entire body went rigid. Her black eyes widened in absolute, paralyzing shock. The demonic energy radiating from her instantly flatlined, trapped by the ancient pagan words written on the parchment. She stood there, completely frozen, her body locked in a horrific state of suspended animation. I pulled my hand out of her mouth, gripped the ceremonial dagger with both hands, aimed directly at the center of her chest, and drove the heavy steel blade deep into her heart. A deafening, concussive shockwave of pure, freezing air exploded from her chest, knocking me backward. Sarah's eyes rolled back into her skull. A thick, oily black ash erupted from her mouth, her eyes, and the wound in her chest, dissipating rapidly into the sterile air of the morgue. The demonic screech faded into nothingness, leaving behind a sudden, heavy, absolute silence. The corpse of the 24-year-old girl collapsed onto the cold linoleum floor, completely lifeless, just as she had been when they first brought her in. I lay on the floor, gasping for air, staring up at the flickering fluorescent lights. Clara rushed over, dropping to her knees beside me, wrapping her arms around me as we both broke down into exhausted, terrified tears. We survived the night. We locked the morgue doors, barricaded ourselves in the security office, and waited for the sun to rise. The next morning, the blizzard finally broke. The roads cleared, and heavily armed state troopers swarmed St. Jude's Memorial Hospital. They found the bodies of Inspector Hayes and poor Harry. They found the blood. They found the destruction. But when the forensic team finally broke down the heavy doors to sub-level 3 and entered the morgue to retrieve the body of the girl, the room was entirely empty. There was no corpse on the floor. There was no blood on the linoleum. The only thing left in the center of the cold, empty room was the heavy bone-handled ceremonial dagger, resting neatly on top of the stainless steel autopsy table. George, the father, hung himself in his holding cell that very same morning. He took the secrets of the succubus to his grave. St. Jude's Memorial Hospital never recovered from the massacre. The official police report blamed a coordinated gang attack, but the nurses and doctors knew the truth. They refused to work the night shifts. They claimed they could hear the soft, melodic sound of a woman laughing in the subterranean corridors. 6 months later, the hospital was permanently shut down. I quit medicine entirely. I moved far away from Anchorage, far away from the snow, and far away from any building that houses the dead. But on the cold, dark nights, when the wind rattles the windows of my house, I still wake up in a cold sweat. Because I know that somewhere out there, walking through the dark, the demon is still starving. And she is still looking for a mate.